Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to join you from Toronto. Um, as Memory said, he and I have been internet connections for a couple of years now, and I've always been very impressed with his deep passion and his deep knowledge of culture. So it's an absolute pleasure to speak with you guys all today. I'm coming to you from Toronto, Canada. That is not the view outside of my bedroom window. That is more typically what a day in Canada looks like. But truth is, I'm a little boy from Bulawayo, and I've been living here in Canada for 20 years now. But that is me many years ago when I was living in Bulawayo before moving here. But now that explains the accent, let's get into today's presentation, which really is about why culture matters. And the truth of the matter is, culture really, really, really does matter. Any organization that is looking and wanting to succeed in the world, culture is it. Culture is the real fuel that will make your organization succeed, or will be the reason that your organizations fail. I love this quote from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, when he says, anything is possible for a company where its culture is about listening, learning, to the company's mission. So there really is one of the most incredible organizations in the world. Their CEO puts culture at the very center of everything that they do. So I wanted to start by going through what I would consider are some common myths about culture that people hear or that managers believe are important. And I would say that many organizations are still mistaking the wrong elements for their culture. They look at things like they have a great cafeteria, or they have free meals for their workers, or they have a foosball table in their office, and they say, well, we have a really fun culture. Or they point to the values on the wall, to a poster, and they say, look at how magnificent all of these things are. The truth of the matter is, that is not your culture. Your culture really is how people behave and make decisions inside your organization. If at any time you're thinking about what is your culture, it is how people look around and they make decisions. Decisions that are at the center of your business, and decisions about how they treat each other, how they treat customers, and what they do when times are problematic. Edgar Skene, who's probably the grandfather of culture, the person who's probably the academic who's probably spent the most time ever working and trying to understand culture, would say there are three levels of culture. One is artifacts and behaviors. What we see when somebody comes into your organization, is it brightly lit or dark? Is it friendly? Do people have smiles on their faces, or do they all walk around very quietly like they're in an accountant office or a legal firm? Is it big, open, wide areas, lots of natural light, or is it closed and dark? That is really just artifacts. Then the next level, according to Edgar Skene, is espoused values. When you ask people what is important around here, they'll tell you. They'll say things like collaboration is important, teamwork is important, respect is important. And often those things are important, and they're often the things that we have on the wall, or it's the things that we talk to people when we're interviewing. We say we really like people who collaborate well. But the reality is, it is the basic assumptions. It's the things that you can't see that really define the culture that you have. And these are the things, these are almost like the unwritten rules of your organization that drive the culture. And I think we could all probably think of some examples inside our individual organizations where we say, we tell people that collaboration is important. But the reality is collaboration in this company means that my manager tells me what to do and then I go and do it. He doesn't ask for my opinion. He doesn't care that I might have some different experience. He just tells me what to do and I go and do it. So that, my friends, is what often happens in organizations when they say, we have a great culture, but the reality is the basic assumptions of how people work and behave together are very, very different. The other thing I often hear is when senior managers and senior leaders say, oh, culture, it's just all warm and fuzzy HR BS. That's what human resources does, and it's all the warm and fuzzy stuff that makes people feel happy when they come to work. And I would suggest that is the absolute worst impression of a culture that you can have, because the reality is your culture has a significant business impact. If you have a great culture, if you have a well understood culture, and if you have what's called a cohesive culture, I would ask each of you to think for a moment about the business impact of the following things. How expensive is it when you have to hire new people? Because your workforce is always changing. People are unhappy and leave. How expensive is that? How expensive is it to hire new people and to train them to be good at what they do and to hate? How expensive is it in your company when departments don't work well together? When your salespeople and your marketing people don't agree? When the people who make your product and the people who sell your product don't like each other and actually work against each other? What kind of impact does that have? And how does that impact your business? That is, these things, these examples are culture. That is your culture at play. And it's not warm and fuzzy. It's right at the center of your organization. In Canada, we had a very extreme example where this company, Tim Hortons, which I would say is a little bit like Nando's. This is a popular place where you can go and buy coffee and donuts and sandwiches, etc., etc. They had a very well-respected culture. In Canada, they were Canada's favorite company for many years. And they were bought by another company, a Brazilian company called 3G, who came in and changed the culture almost overnight. They started to say that all of the care and respect that Tim Hortons people would have for their customers, they could no longer do. Here is the business impact of that. Tim Hortons in Canada went from #1 reputation amongst Canadians to number 56 on a list, because the culture changed how people behaved towards each other, and it changed, therefore, how people behave towards the customer. And that has a very, very big impact. I ask you to look at some of these organizations, and I appreciate that many of these are from America and from England, but these are a list of international companies who are no longer around. And the reason is their culture got in the way of their business success. And while I may not be proud of the fact, I personally worked with both Nokia and Enron. So I had the opportunity to see their culture firsthand, to live inside their organizations, to work with people from those companies. And I saw myself how their culture created the challenges and problems that made them fail. And I would suggest that if companies with this much money, this much talent, and this much potential can fail, it means that it can happen to any company that doesn't look at their culture first as a route to success. The other thing that I hear often, and perhaps you may even say it yourself, is, well, the culture is okay. It takes care of itself. We have these great posters on the wall, and every couple of weeks, our managing director comes and tells us all good news or sends us an email telling us how amazing we all are. And the culture can just take care of itself. And I would suggest to you that that is incorrect. That every single day when your people come to work, they are looking for signs that the culture is still the same as the culture was yesterday when they left. Your people every single day are looking for two things from you as leaders of culture. Number one, they are looking for consistency. When you ask them to do something, do you ask in the same way? Do you act in a similar fashion? Do you do the same things day in and day out? Do you allow them to know that when you ask for something quickly, you mean quickly? And when they act in a certain way, what happens is always the same. If one day you praise them for thinking proactively, and the next day you punish them for thinking proactively, you create confusion in your culture. The next thing that they look for is believability. When you tell me something, do I believe you? Do I agree? Do I understand? And every single time that you communicate with your people, with your colleagues, with your leaders, with the people who work for you, they ask themselves, do I believe this person? Those two things, consistency and believability, are so critically important. I've done many interviews with cultural leaders across the world, and this is one of the most incredible things that I heard from a former colleague, an executive of an organization based in New York that has 25,000 employees around the world. And he said to me, culture is a deliberate, relentless, often expensive, and painful set of choices you make every single day. And as leaders, if you are responsible for culture, and you all are, if you're leaders, every single day you need to ask yourself, what am I doing today? What have I done today to make sure the culture is stronger than it was yesterday? What have I done to be more believable? And what have I done to be more consistent so there are no surprises for my people? The other thing, and this is again part of work that I do here in North America, is a lot of companies are going through what's called digital transformation. And that is, it's particularly in the midst of COVID-19, where people cannot go to shops and stores and things like that. A lot of companies are moving and having to move a lot of their business online and making it digital. And for all the companies that try to do that, the results are that 84% fail because not of the technology, but because the behaviors of their people did not change. In fact, often it was the behaviors of their people that was the reason it failed. So if I ask you, is there a business impact to getting your culture right? I would suggest to you, this is a business reason for getting your culture right. The other part is this, which is the companies that have or are considered great companies to work for have over-delivered in terms of their share and sales results over a period, a 5-year period, by 84.2%. So again, cultures and organizations where people get it right, where the organization and the people in it understand what they are trying to do and their role in that, outperform other organizations almost 2-to-1. Again, that's the kind of statistic that any of you working in HR should take to your managing director and say, this is why investing in our culture will have an impact on our bottom line. If we do not, we will not succeed as quickly or as well as we could. I wanted to take a bit of time, guys, this morning to just talk about 3 companies in particular that I have followed. I've been fortunate to work with 2 of them. And just to talk about some cultures specifically and some organizations specifically that do this well. And I think of them as superheroes, much like the Marvel superheroes that you can see in front of you. Here is one great example, the Hulk. And I always look at this gentleman, Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer was the CEO of Microsoft before Satya Nadella, and he was very much like the Hulk. And I'm going to play a video of him that was him at a all-staff announcement to everybody at Microsoft. Now, I wonder how many of you work at a company where your general manager or your managing director is that excitable, is that interested, and is that happy when a new product is released. Steve Ballmer was very much that type of CEO for Microsoft. But the unfortunate thing is the way that he developed the culture at Microsoft, as you can see in this famous cartoon from 1995, is that he created such a competitive environment inside where winning at Microsoft meant that one of your colleagues had to lose, that he actually put departments almost in direct fighting and conflict with each other. Now, I would ask you, if you think about a company where internally the people are fighting, what are the chances that company will ever succeed? If the people who work for the same company are actually fighting each other, what chances that company have to succeed? But let me talk to you about the resurrection, if you will, of Microsoft under this gentleman, Satya Nadella. Satya Nadella came into Microsoft, this company that was historically very competitive and fighting itself internally, and presented a couple of these areas of improvement. And I'll leave this up on the screen because I think each of you should look at this and look at your company and consider how important some of these things could be for you. Everybody works for a company that has a past, that has a story, that has something that they've done in the past that is really probably important. It's a bit of a legend about your company. And often those legends are very important and a source of pride for the people that you work with. What are the stories that give pride to your people that you need to have? The other is having what's called a purpose-driven mission. What is it that your company is looking to achieve? How are you looking to make the world a better place because your company does what it does? Number 3, and this is the one I would encourage all of you to think about. What are some of the small changes, not the huge changes, but the small changes you can make at your company that will signal to your people things are different today? Memory had shared with me this morning some questions that had come in from participants a little bit earlier about how do you get a culture transformation to begin? And I would suggest that sometimes it doesn't need to be a big and enormous exercise. That sometimes you can signal to your people with small things that it is a different company and the way you're operating will be different. Number 4, communicate, 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 again, is something very important. And I think often what we forget is because as the people who do the communications, we think that because we've listened to the message 5 times, that every one of our colleagues understands it, can interpret it, and can do what's required of themselves. That is not always the truth. And then the very last thing is, even as a leader, or particularly as a leader, keep your ego in check. Stay humble. Be a people-driven leader. Do not be an arrogant person that no one respects. So let's go into these in a little bit of detail. Honor the past and embrace the future. This was one of the first things that Satya Nadella showed to his colleagues at Microsoft. And think about how much of an impact this would have made for somebody who'd worked for that company for 10 years. On the left, this is what Microsoft was known as by its customers and by the people working there. It was a place of fear. It was a place of individual achievement. It was a place that looked for heroes. And it had to be a hero meant that you had defeated enemies around you to succeed. And it was a place that was very, very critical. 2, the kind of environment that Satya Nadella has put in, which is this a place where we can be supportive of each other, where we can be brave, where we can focus on the customer and work as a team, and we can be one Microsoft instead of 50,000 individuals. Think about how powerful that is to signal to your people you want to change. Excuse me. Have a purpose-driven mission. Again, at Microsoft, this was the mission that they put forward. Empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Now, I ask each of you, if you had a choice to go to work for a company who said, this is what we are here to do. When I go and work on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, this is what I am trying to do. I am trying to help every person and every company on the planet achieve more. Can you imagine how motivating that would be to your staff to feel that they had something that was more than just earning a paycheck? Now, I can appreciate that can be very hard and difficult to do, but I would also suggest that every one of us on this phone call, our job is to motivate our people to bring the very best of themselves to the company. And can you imagine anything more motivating than saying, when you are here, you are impacting every person on the planet, because that's what we want to do. Very, very powerful. Very, very motivating. Change is small and symbolic. Again, not everything you need to do needs to be enormous, expensive, and time-consuming. Some of it can be very small things, but they can have a huge signal. Here are some of the things that Microsoft changed. One of them was what's called unconscious bias. And that photograph at the bottom right of those 4 people around the table is taken from a series of videos that Microsoft put together and shared with all of their people to say, often we make decisions with what's called unconscious bias. And unconscious bias can mean we don't think that women are good leaders. We may not say that openly, but we have that feeling internally. Or we don't believe that some of our younger people have good ideas because they don't have the same experience as us. And what that means is some of our talented new people will leave our company because they don't feel appreciated or heard. So Microsoft recognized that their culture was actually doing that and created training materials to help. The charts above and all of those graphs, etc., became a way that the organization started to track the commitment and contribution of their people differently. And they started to put different metrics in place and looked at different KPIs for performance. And that again signaled a huge change within Microsoft to say, in the past, we used to track your performance in the following ways. We're not going to do that anymore. These are the things that we think are important for this culture today. So again, some of these are small and some of these are very symbolic, but they suggested a big change in the company. Communicate, communicate, communicate. We talked about this earlier, but the one reality is that every moment Satya Nadella stood up in front of Microsoft and stood up in the press, he said, my job is to change this culture so everyone can succeed. And he kept saying that again and again and again and again. The communication part is so critical. Remember I said earlier about believability and consistency. Communication is one way that you can make that happen. And it's a way that Satya Nadella is world-class at doing. So my first lesson for all of you is that as leaders in your company, you set the tone. It is up to you to be the person. If you want the culture to be different, you are the person that is the one that will make that change begin. You have to be the person who takes charge of that. And this is a personal definition of culture, but I think one that is often very important, which is the worst behavior that your management lets go is what your people will look and say is the culture. And I will give you an example. If your company lets people be racist, that is your culture. If your company lets your top sales performing person abuse his secretary and shout at her and tell her horrible things, that is your culture. Your culture is what people see your managers doing, and the worst things that they do is what people believe is the culture of your company. So I would ask you, what is it about the behavior of your management that you will no longer tolerate because you want a better culture? I ask each of you to think about that and write down a list of behavior that you will no longer let happen inside your company because you want the culture to be better. Culture hero number 2 is Iron Man Tony Stark, and I'm sure there's some of you out there that are fans of all of the Iron Man movies. For me, Iron Man is this gentleman, Reed Hastings, who is the CEO of Netflix, a company I'm sure that you know of and may even be familiar with. And this is one of the most powerful things that I've ever read about culture from a company leader. Do not tolerate brilliant jerks. The cost to teamwork is too high. This is the CEO of a company saying, I don't care how smart that person is or how good a salesperson they are. If they are a jerk, if they are horrible, if they are not a team player, we will not hire them because their impact in our company will be bad. They will not have a positive impact on our company. They will have a very negative impact. Many companies, for example, talk about wanting to create a culture that feels like a family, that it feels like the kind of culture you have at a family. At Netflix, they say that is the worst thing that any organization can do. And why is that? Because as a family, we make excuses for our brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts. We let some of the bad behavior of our family members not prevent them from joining us for dinner. We may say, my uncle drinks too much, but he's still my uncle, so he has to come to my daughter's wedding. That's not the kind of excuses that you want. And that's not the type of thing that you want in an organization that is looking to succeed. The better thing is, as Netflix has, they want a culture that thinks like a sports team, that thinks about the performance of each person and thinks about whether those people are still performing. Because if they're not performing, then they're not helping the company move forward. And that is the only reason that they should be there, is to help the company move forward. So Netflix is very, very deliberate to say, I do not want a culture like family. I want a culture like a sports team that is all about winning and all about performance and succeeding. In fact, at Netflix, they call that person the rare, responsible person. That they actually have a name for the person that they want inside their company. And this is the person that in every interview they look for, and every day they look inside their company to say, is this person a rare and responsible person? More importantly, this is how they describe that person. And I would ask you to look at that list and say, at your company, can you describe the person or people that will make your company succeed? Do you have a list like this? Can you look at everybody in your company and say, these are the people we want here? Look at how powerful that list is. I particularly like the last two sentences here. A rare, responsible person doesn't wait to be told what to do. How incredibly wonderful would it be at your company if you didn't have to tell your people every day what you needed them to do, but they knew what needed to be done and they just went ahead and did it? How powerful would that be? And how much more likely would you be to succeed if all of your people acted like that? And the last one I love even more. Picks up the trash lying on the floor. And why is that so important? because it shows that they have pride in their company, that they think of the company as something that they are responsible for, that they feel ownership of, that they feel so strongly about, that they will go and pick up the trash, because that's what you do when it's your place. I'm sure all of you, when you come home, if you see some dirt on the floor, you pick it up. Why? Because inside your house, you have pride. You have ownership of your house. You want it to look good. You want it to be brilliant. Imagine if all of your people felt like that about the place that they worked at. How incredible would that be for your culture? And how incredible would that be for your company? Here's the other thing, and again, I had a chat with Memory earlier in the week about this. Here's the other impressive thing about Netflix. Rather than just putting up words on a wall that say trust and collaboration and teamwork, Netflix goes one level deeper and says, how do we describe that word inside our company? If I was to ask everybody on this call, what is their definition of a word like trust? I would imagine that I would probably get 10 or 15 different types of answers, because trust is a very, very loaded word that has lots of different interpretations and definitions based on each of our own individual experiences. Now, think again how important it is for your people to have the same definition of words like trust, like teamwork, like innovation, like selflessness. I'd ask you to just read this list and see how powerful that is as a leader in your company, to say to your people, are you being selfless? And being able to show them this list and say, yes, you are, or no, you're not. I'm actually going to ask all of you a question now, and I would like you to send your answers to Memory, please. I'd like to know who, if any of you on this call, have your values described in this kind of detail for your people. I don't need to know your names, and I certainly don't need to know which companies you're at, but I would be very interested to know how many of you have these types of things for your company, and if you use them. And if you use them in everything that you do, from recruitment to rewarding and promoting your people, or when it comes time to discipline your people, are you able to use these types of very clear definitions to help them and to help you? So lesson number 2, I would suggest for any great culture, is your values matter. They are important, but behaviors matter more. Your ability to define those behaviors is very, very critical. And I would suggest, and this is some relatively recent work that I've been doing with a gentleman in New Zealand called Jeremy Dean, and I will share his details with Memory so he can share it to everybody here. But what some of the work that Jeremy does is actually about understanding the emotions within your company and within your culture. Because I think for anybody on this call, if we think about this for a moment, think about how you behave and ask yourself how often you behave because of your emotions. An emotion of love. You stop on the way home to pick up flowers for your wife. That is driven by an emotion of love. You almost have a car accident on the way driving to work on Monday. You are angry. You are scared. You nearly lost your life. How do you behave when you get into the office? Are you happy and cheerful and easy to deal with? Or do you shout because you've just had an accident and nearly lost your life? So if we think that emotions do not have an impact on how we behave at work, I would suggest that they have a significant impact. And I would ask you to consider, just think about the leaders in your organization. If their child has just graduated from university or got married, or if they're going through a painful and expensive divorce, do they behave in a similar way? Or as leaders, do they behave very differently? And I would ask you to think about what impact that has, those behaviors and those emotions have on your culture and your leadership every day. Consider that for a moment as you work through the culture and the leadership you want to have in your company. The third and final sort of superhero, culture superhero for me is one from probably one of the toughest businesses in the world. You may remember this from 2017 when a United Airlines, excuse me, when a United Airlines passenger was dragged off the plane by security because he was seated in the wrong place. And remember how people sit and think about airlines and how they are the least friendly place in the world. That it's a place where they just want your money and then they cram you into a little plane like sardines in a tin. And they charge you for a can of Coke, where in the past you used to get the can of Coke for free. Now consider, oops, sorry about that. Sorry, let me bring this presentation up again. There we go. Sorry, gentlemen. Now think about that in a world of COVID, where now the airlines, if you're flying on a plane today, it very much looks like this. Think about how tough that environment is to work in the airline industry today. So my third superhero is Ant-Man, probably the smallest superhero of all time, but perhaps one of the most powerful. And that is Herb Keller. That is the legendary leader and founder of Southwest Airlines, perhaps the most famous culture in the world of an organization in the airline industry. And this is what he said, is if you think small and act small, then you get bigger. But if you think big and act big, you actually get smaller. Why is that important? Because for him, the idea of always being, of never being too big and too overconfident and too arrogant is what actually makes most organizations fail. Herb Keller, obviously the leader of Southwest Airlines, recurringly one of the most impressive organizations in the world, and I've been fortunate to spend time with the wonderful people at Southwest Airlines. And it is, for anybody who loves culture, it is like visiting the center of culture in the world. This is such an incredible, wonderful, brilliant organization. And I'm going to play a little video which I think will bring this to life for each of you.
Good evening. folks, welcome aboard Southwest Airlines Flight 372, service to Oklahoma City. Those of you that have flown us before know that we do things a little bit differently here on Southwest. Some of us tell jokes, some of us sing, some of us just stand there and look beautiful. I, unfortunately, can do none of those. So here's the one thing that I do know how to do. We're going to shake things up a little bit. I need a little audience participation. Otherwise, this is not going to go over well at all. So here's what I need, especially you guys in the front, because you know what's coming. All right, I need a beat, all right? All I need you to do is stomp and clap, and I'm going to do the rest because I've had 5 flights today, and I just cannot do the regular boring announcement again. Otherwise, I'm going to put myself to sleep. So, you guys with me? All right. So, give me a stomp, clap, stomp, clap. Come on, stomp, clap, stomp, clap. Stay on beat there. There you go. Keep that going. This is Flight 372 on SWA. The flight attendants on board serving you today. Teresa in the middle, David in the back. My name is David, and I'm here to tell you that shortly after takeoff, first things first, there's soft drinks and coffee to quench your thirst. But if you want another kind of drink, then just holler. Alcoholic beverages will be $4. If a Monster Energy drink is your plan, that'll be $3, and you get the whole can. We won't take your cash, you gotta pay with plastic. If you have a coupon, then that's fantastic. We know you're ready to get to new places. Open up the bins, put away your suitcases. Carry on items, go under the seat in front of you, so none of you have things by your feet. If you have a seat on the road with the exit, we're gonna talk to you, so you might as well expect it. You gotta help evacuate in case we need you. If you don't want to, then we're gonna reseat you. Before we leave, our advice is put away your electronic devices. Fasten your seatbelt, then put your trays up. Press the button to make the seat back raise up. Sit back, relax, have a good time. It's almost time to go, so I'm done with the ride. Thank you for the fact that I wasn't ignored. This is Southwest Airlines. Welcome aboard. Thank you very much for my beat. I appreciate that. You will not get that on United Airlines, I guarantee you.
So I would ask every one of you on this call, imagine what it takes. Look at that excitement from that person. Look at that joy in him doing his job, in him working. And most importantly, look at the reaction of the customer. Look at how they felt they were being treated like a human being. And this is a guy, you heard him say at the start of that, this is my 5th flight today. And he still had that energy. He still had that excitement. He still had that passion. He still had that desire to work and bring that, all of that to the company. And I will tell you, that is exactly what it is like to fly Southwest Airlines. And I would imagine that is exactly what you don't get when you fly Air Zimbabwe or you fly SAA. Please tell me, unless it has changed since the last time I flew either of those great airlines, that is not the passion of the people that work for that company. And here is why, and here is some of the things that Southwest Airlines do so differently. What they do is they set incredible expectations of their people. They say to their people, we expect you to be adults. We will treat you like adults, but we will tell you exactly what we expect of you. And the most important thing about that is it makes it very clear to anybody thinking about working at Southwest Airlines what they need to bring to the table. There is no ambiguity. The great thing is they also tell them what they expect and how they expect them to behave. Live the Southwest way, work the Southwest way. Again, everybody at Southwest Airlines knows this explicitly. And here's the third and most important part I leave you all with. They talk, and it's not on this slide, but I will definitely share it with memory, is they say that if you act like this, you can expect the same from the company. We don't expect you to work for nothing. We don't expect you to be passionate and us to treat you like everyone else. But if you act and work in this way, then you can get and expect from us, the company, the following things. And here's an interesting thing for you guys all to consider, that it is actually tougher to get a job at Southwest Airlines than it is to get into Harvard University. There are more people applying for jobs at Southwest Airlines, and it is tougher to get that job than it is to be a student at one of the best universities on the planet. That is because Southwest Airlines, like Netflix and like Microsoft, is only prepared to hire people that will help them succeed. And they are only prepared to create a culture where everybody knows what is required to win and to succeed and what their job is. This is the CEO of Southwest Airlines. And they are, you saw how fun that steward was. This is every year at Halloween, how the CEO dresses up for his people. He is as much a fun and fabulous person as anybody in that company. And that is what's required to build a great culture. It starts at the top, and it is for everyone. I would ask, do the leaders in your company exemplify the very best of what they want to achieve? And do they set the tone? Do they behave in a way that shows the right way to win at your company? The lesson number 3 is set incredible expectations of your people and set even higher expectations of your leaders and of your organization if you want a culture of success. Number 1, so to recap quickly, as leaders, you set the tone. Behaviors and emotions matter in creating a world-class culture. And number 3, set incredible expectations of yourself and of everyone around you if you want an organization that will win and will win tremendously in the market. I leave you with this, which is Lou Gerstner, the CEO of IBM, who led one of the greatest cultural transformations of any organization in history with IBM. And I was fortunate to be working with IBM at the time. And look at how profound this is, where he said, culture is not one aspect of the game, it is the game. For Lou Gerstner, a company at IBM of over 100,000 employees worldwide, for him, he realized that culture and only culture is what would make that organization succeed. And with that, I thank you all for your time, and I am open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Hilton. I think if I were to summarize this, it's really a lot of information and insights and examples. What I like most is the examples that you were giving, so that people can have takeaways in terms of the culture journey transformation that they need to undertake. I'll open this up for questions. Maybe we'll limit the questions to 6 or so questions if they're burning questions. Then you can take those questions, then we can close the session. So if you want to ask a question, I've got Duduzi Lemhlanga, your hand is up. If you want to ask a question, you can go ahead. I don't know whether the hand up was to ask a question or something. Mrs. Mhlanga? Mrs. Mhlanga?
Don't be shy, guys.
Okay, any other person?
May I ask while Mrs. Mhlanga is
Yes, Prosper.
coming up? Thank you, man. Thank you, Memory. Thanks, Hilton. Hey, it's nice to talk to a Zimbabwean from that side of the planet. And,
Well, I'm loving to hear the accent. I must tell you, I'm going to go downstairs, and my wife, who is born in Gweru, she will have missed all of this wonderful conversation. So thank you.
Okay,
What is
man.
your question?
I'm also employer guy, eh?
Of course, I could tell.
All right, Hilton, thanks. From your experience, you worked for Nokia, you said, and Enron. Then you mentioned unconscious bias.
Sorry, I missed that last word.
Then you mentioned unconscious bias.
Yes.
Yes, and then I don't want to ask as how does one have to deal with that? There are other issues like cognitive biases, logical fallacies, and illogical. Debating. Say you are in a meeting and you're discussing issues. That sort of culture where debate goes, according to the person chairing, for example, but it's not. It doesn't stick to the logical rules of debating, and so issues tend to be unrealistic.
Yes.
In your experience, how have you dealt with that?
Well, firstly, so thank you for your question. It's a really great question because it happens in every organization, and if truth be told, it is something that happens in the organization I'm with currently from time to time. So I would suggest there's a couple of things that you can do. Number one, I think is, and I've seen this work very well, is that you take inside every single boardroom in your company, you should have something that reminds people of the behaviors that you want in and from every meeting. And even consider having somebody who leads the meeting remind people at the start of the meeting, this is what meetings at this company are like. We always end with an outcome. We always end with a decision. And we always end with somebody held accountable. And having that reinforcement at the start of every meeting is a very tactical and small way that you can reinforce that is the type of behavior you want. I think the second thing, and probably the harder part for you perhaps, is to take that leader to one side and say, the struggle we're having with not the debate, but where the debate finishes, is that we are unclear about expectations. And there is no mechanism for us to discuss, and there is no mechanism for us to succeed. And what I'm hearing, and again, perhaps something I can share with memory, is what might be helpful is to do a leadership style assessment of your leaders. And that is a 360 assessment from both the leader, and he talks about his style, and then from the people that leader works for. So the leader can get some objective feedback on how their style is. Some leaders are good and some leaders are terrible. But here's one thing I will tell you from across the world. Every leader I've ever met believes they're a better leader than they actually are, because no one is really objective about their leadership. Just like being a husband or being a dancer, you probably think you're a better husband or dancer than perhaps other people might. But if you really want to succeed, you will take that feedback. So I will happily share some things with memory that could perhaps help you and that leader in particular.
Thank you, Hilton. I've got another question here from a participant. They say, how do you deal with people who are toxic, who fight everyone in the organization? That's question number one. Number two.
Let me answer that question because it's a critical question for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what Southwest Airlines would say. And I asked them a similar question. I didn't say toxic, but I said, what happens if you find somebody who doesn't act in accordance with your values? And the person who was the general manager of culture for Southwest Airlines said to me the following: we do everything we can to train them, to show them the way, to tell them what it is that we expect of them here. We give them that opportunity. We train them and we give them that opportunity. And if they still do not understand and are still unwilling to change, then we promote them to being a customer, which means we say goodbye and good riddance. I would ask all of you, that Netflix example is why I put that in there. That is how you have to treat toxic people. But here's what you have to do first. You have to understand why they are toxic. And have you told them and shown them why their behavior is toxic? If you have not, that is not their problem. That is your responsibility. It starts with you to tell and show them why they are being toxic and why they need to change. And if they don't change, then I think the answer is quite clear. They have to go.
Yeah. Well, it's on that, Hilton. There's another example that you were giving me before we started this presentation where the company pays you to leave. Which company is that?
So there's a great company based in Las Vegas called Zappos. And again, a company whose culture you may be very familiar with. But at the end of their interview process, as they're about to offer you a job, what they say is, unless you're prepared to commit to being a person who lives and loves the values of this company, we're actually going to pay you not to take the job, because we would prefer you not take the job than come here and create the toxic culture that will destroy our company. So if you want to look up Zappos, Zappos, you will find some very great culture lessons from that company too.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, what assessment tools would you recommend to assess culture when one goes into an organization or a team?
That's another excellent question. I am a fan of doing two things. One is quantitative. So I am a fan of doing some kind of surveys and some kind of survey instruments. The reason being is you can't do interviews with everybody in an organization. And from everything that people like Edgar Skeen and Larry Senge will tell you, there is very little benefit in interviewing everybody in your company, unless your company is 15 people, in which case you can do it. But if your company is 500 people from Harare to Bulawayo to Joosfingo, it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to do it. So you need to have some kind of survey, I would suggest, but you also need to do some qualitative interviews with leadership and middle management too. I have a personal bias. I like the tools of human synergistics. I've found them very useful in the work that I've done. And again, would be happy to share some of that material with memory after this call. But personally, the difference is human synergistics is one of the few companies I know whose surveys actually measure culture and what drives culture, and not climate. And I would say that most, if not all, engagement surveys do not measure culture. They just measure the temperature and climate of your company today. And that is not helpful for those of you looking for some of the culture issues you need to address.
Thank you, Hilton. Another question. What if the stipulated culture is different from the lived or experienced culture? The person says they can explain further if required.
No, I would say that is not an unusual situation for many organizations. Again, this is the difference. between what companies say on the wall and what they say when they're interviewing talent, and then what happens when those people actually join the company and wander around and see how decisions are actually made. So the very first thing I would say to you is that is not unusual. So do not be, unfortunately, it is not unusual. I think we would all want there to be more alignment between what we say is our culture and what our culture actually is. My first response would be, what is the culture you need to succeed? What is the type of culture that your business strategy needs to succeed? And often, and this is why I had these slides at the start, companies look at culture as something to make their people feel good. That is not what culture is there for. Culture is there to help make consistent decisions to help your company succeed. That is it. If it happens to be a place where people have fun when they come to work, then that's great. That's amazing. But your culture's first responsibility is to help the company succeed. So as leaders, my first request of you is, can you articulate what is the culture required for your company to succeed? If you can't do that, then the problem starts at the very beginning. You have to be able to articulate that. Then you have to understand how your current culture differs from that culture of success you're looking for. Again, I think some of the materials I'll share with memory regarding human synergistics can give you some ideas in that area too.
Good. Another question, how do you convince top management that emotions matter when they perceive dealing with emotions as a sign of weakness?
Well, firstly, I would say you need more female leaders. And that's the truth. I mean, but I can say that I live in a house with a wife and 2 daughters, so I'm immediately outnumbered. But the leadership in this family is infinitely better. Again, this is the reality of, unfortunately, decades of people believing strong leaders are good leaders, and the reality is that is not the truth. That is not the case. In fact, there's increasing research that highlights that the way that females lead, by collaboration and teamwork and empathy and vulnerability, actually creates stronger cultures, creates stronger organizations, and creates better leadership. And I would point to, again, look at the situation we're all experiencing globally with COVID. And the interesting thing has been, and there's been research recently come out about this, that the countries led by females actually have succeeded better in getting their countries and economies back together. New Zealand, Finland are 2 great examples. South Korea and Germany with Angela Merkel, exactly, another great example. So I would suggest the conversation about emotions will not be easy for some of your leaders. I appreciate that, which is why I used some of the examples this morning with you, which are really about consider the impact that emotions have on behaviors, and ask each leader to actually maybe even keep a journal over a 2-week period. Ask each of your leaders to keep a journal of their mood, of their emotions, and then ask them what kinds of decisions they made while they were in those moments. And then have an honest conversation with them to say, did they make a good and sound and reasonable decision when their emotions were at play? And I would imagine the answer will be no. So you don't need to attack the emotions part. I think it would maybe be better to show them. And perhaps if you do that simple exercise, you can show them how emotions do have both a positive and negative impact on the culture around them.
Good. Then the other question, how does culture affect change management in an organization?
Wow. Do we have another 3 hours?
I think we'll take, if there are any questions, we'll just take 3 more, that's it.
No. That's fine. I mean, guys, it's a good look. It's a great question, and it's a very critical question. The reality is, culture has a significant impact on change and on change management, because I think as anyone who's ever done any change management work understands, there are sort of 3 states of change from each individual. You have active endorsers, people who are keen and invigorated by the change and want to actually participate and help in the change. Then you have active rejectors. These are people to whom change is a threat, change is something they don't appreciate, change is something they do not want to do. And they do everything in their power to prevent the change from being successful. And then you have a lot of people, typically between 40 to 60% in the middle, that are called passive rejectors. And these are people who sit on the fence and wait to see how the change will affect them. They sit and observe. They don't proactively help. They don't proactively hinder. They just sit and wait to see if the change will actually happen. So they are more cynical and skeptical, and they're the people who have a profound impact on whether a change can happen. The short answer is all of those people are impacted by the culture. Again, remember I said at the start of this thing, does your culture, do your people believe you? And do you act consistently? And think of that in the spirit of change. When you talk to them about the impact of change, is your message consistent and is it believable? Do you act in that time of change consistently and with integrity and authenticity? If you don't, then you are adding even more complications to change because your people do not know what is consistent and what is expected of them.
Yeah.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Douglas, maybe let's take a question from Douglas. You can go ahead.
Okay, I think my question, thanks Memory and Hilton. I think we all know what sort of national culture we have in this country, where it's well known now worldwide for corruption. Mm-hmm. How easy is it for company leadership to come up with a positive and sustainable culture in this sea of corruption?
Wow, Douglas, Douglas, I applaud you for your courage, and I applaud you for your humanity, mate. What an excellent question. I will tell you it's difficult for me to give you an answer that will not sound like a platitude. So I apologize up front for that. Here's what my honest answer would be if I was talking to your managing director. I would say your organization and you as a leader have a choice. The choice is how much you are prepared and willing to let that behavior run your business. Now, I've been, the last time I visited Zim was 5 years ago. The last time I lived there was 20 years ago. So I can't talk about what it's like to run a business day to day in the country. But I can appreciate how incredibly difficult it must be. Mm-hmm. But I would suggest to you that every leader has a choice. And that is about their own integrity. That is about their own leadership. And they can look at it and they have to start. They have to be the person who sets the rules. And if they say corruption is okay, for whatever reason, I need to do this because if I don't, then the business collapses. And if the business collapses, then hundreds of people go out of work and are unemployed. and they are my responsibility. If that is the decision that they make, then that is their choice. But I would suggest that it has to begin with the leader. Like any culture, it begins with the leader, and it begins with how the leader chooses to behave and how they choose to tell their people, this is the appropriate behavior in this company. Because if they choose to say, we will not stand for corruption, then they need to make sure that they are the very first example of not standing for corruption, because otherwise they are just lying to themselves and lying to their people. So again, Douglas, what a magnificent question. And I'm sorry I couldn't give you a stronger answer than that, but what a brilliant, brilliant question, mate. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you. I think Hilton, you've done a wonderful job. So many questions. Otherwise, I will be detaining you for the next 2 hours. I would like to thank you very much for your time, the time that you were supposed to be with your kids under this lockdown. So well done for remembering your homeland. And we really appreciate the presentation. This presentation, like I talked to Hilton earlier on, is recorded. I will share all the information that Hilton will give me that he has promised. Probably tomorrow, I will be able to share all the information with all of them, including this particular recording. It will be on our website, yes. I'll also share with Hilton so that he can share globally with his own colleagues also there, so that we can share it. And also, when you see us sharing this information, please share with a lot of other people on your social media platforms. Yeah.
And guys, if you know, this is my website. I'm just showing you here. If you want to visit that, there's all sorts of things, interesting things to read. I hope things that may help you, things that you may find of use. And of course, if you're on LinkedIn, then please reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with fellow countrymen, and we can exchange conversations about biltong and boerewors and stuff. And then of course, if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me. This will be very easy. I am Zim Hilton on Twitter, at Zim Hilton on Twitter. I think I'm the only one. My thank you to all of you. My thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear the accent, to hear the voices, and to connect with my fellow countrymen. So, hambagashe, and have yourself a fantastic Sunday.
Thank you, Hilton. Enjoy your day. Thank you. I think it's in the morning there, so enjoy your day. We are getting close to the evening now. Thank you.
All right. Take good care.
Thank you.